Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Nanette Kamian. I'm the founder of Inspiration Financial Planning. Today I want to talk to you about 3 steps to paying for college without going broke. But let me start out by telling you a little bit about my firm. I founded Inspiration Financial Planning in 2015. We're an independent, full service, fee only fiduciary financial planning firm, and all that means to you is that we give advice that's solely in your best interest. We don't sell investments and we don't sell insurance. We are college experts, which means that we take all of your financial aspects of your life, including retirement and investments, into account when we think about helping you pay for college. We have a 6-part mission. Our first part of our mission is to empower families to make informed college choices. Number 2 is to save on the cost of college, not just for the cost of college. Traditionally, financial advisors have only been helping families save with the latter. Number 3, we want you to have a proactive solution to paying for college rather than a reactive 4-year college funding plan. Number 4, we'd like to help you remove the emotion and make a rational college buying decision because, as we'll talk about later, college is a business. You need to be a smart consumer. Number 5, we want to help you and your students graduate on time with manageable student loan debt. We'll talk a little bit about the student loan crisis and what that means to you. And number 6, our goal is, like I said, to fit college into your entire financial picture. So our goal is to help you pay for college without robbing your retirement. So let's talk about the 6 steps on the college funding timeline. Some of you may be in step number 1, where you're preparing for the cost of college. You're learning about how much college costs. This typically happens in your child's freshman, sophomore, junior year. Steps 2 through 6 really happen in the senior year, where you're applying for admission and scholarships, financial aid. You're looking at analyzing your financial aid offers and potentially appealing them. You want to help choose the right school for your student and accept your financial aid award. And then if there's any shortfalls, that you would take that into consideration in May of your senior year. So let's get right into the steps to paying for college without going broke. Step 1 is really about learning how much college costs. It's probably going to surprise you what your budget might be and what your funding philosophy is. So in 2016 right now, we're looking at approximately $25,000 for a 4-year public in-state tuition and fees and room and board. And for a 4-year private school, it's about double that. It's about $50,000. And if we're looking at a 6% annual increase in 12 years, those prices are going to double. And that's a real problem for families who are trying to save for college while they're trying to meet all their other financial goals. These numbers are significantly higher than they used to be back when I went to school. And so parents are sometimes shocked at how expensive college has become, which has led us to the current student loan debt crisis. Student loans right now total over $1.4 trillion. That's a 510% increase over the last 10 years. It's $2,700 per second is the increase in student loan debt. And for the 2016 graduating class, 7 in 10 of those graduates have student loans with an average of approximately $37,000. And what that translates into is about a $370 a month payment over 10 years. And you might be thinking, well, that's not all that bad. We'll talk about it later, but it really does depend on what the student does after they graduate and if they graduate within 4 years and get a good job. So, like I talked about before, college is business. And what you typically think about when you think about looking at a college is the academic and social fit for your child at a particular school. But what I'd like you to consider is looking at a third category of evaluating colleges, and that's the financial fit. And an institution that fits into all of those 3 buckets is what we call a unicorn college. And that's a term that you might hear over and over again. And it really is that really good blend of academic, social, and financial fit. And a couple of ways that you can analyze those that financial fit is to know the graduation rates. For public schools, it's about 44% within 4 years, which might seem shocking to you, and under 60% graduate within 6 years. For private colleges, it's slightly higher, about 53% within 4 years and a little over 65% within 6 years. The second category of knowledge you need to have about each school is the value of the degree and the major in that school. Know internship and job placement opportunities, and then know also how the financial aid is awarded for those schools. I've got a couple websites here that you can check out to get some of those figures. I also have some resources on my website, and I'll give you the link to that a little later at the end. So like we were saying when we were talking about loans just a minute ago, it really does depend on the major that your child is interested in. If they're a humanities and social sciences major, the average starting salary is approximately $38,000. If they're an engineering major, it's almost $63,000. So the loan, what constitutes a loan burden that your student can handle after they graduate really does depend on what they major in. The average really doesn't tell the whole story. So the first topic that I want you to think about is what your funding philosophy is. And this is not the place where parents typically start when they're thinking about paying for school, but I found that parents oftentimes haven't thought about what drives their desire to help their kids pay for college. And they also haven't talked to each other about maybe the different experiences they've had back when they went to school. For example, one parent may have had their parents pay their entire bill for college. They didn't have to work. They didn't have to take out any student loans. The parents paid for everything, and they really feel like they should be able to do that for their kids. On the other hand, the spouse may have had to work through school. They may have had to take out some loans and, really had to sort of foot the bill themselves, and their parents might not have helped them. And so they might feel that helping their kids is great if they can do it, but they want their kids to also have some skin in the game. And these are things that I would really encourage you to talk about with each other and think about for yourself before you start looking at schools with your child. And even though you might have a particular philosophy on how you want to help, your finances might not allow you to do so. And what I try to work with people on is to think about paying for college like buying a house. If you can't afford a particular house, if it's not in your budget, you don't want to go see it because there are certainly aspects of that house that are going to be appealing to you and they're going to seem much better than a house that's in your budget. But I would really encourage you to think about your budget first when you think about going to look for schools. Now, there's a handful of sort of categories of funding that go into what your budget might look like. The top one up here is savings. Number 2 would be cash flow. So that's what you can spend out of pocket while your child's going through college. Many parents find that once their kids go to college, they spend less on groceries, they spend less on activities. So really dig deep into your expenses to understand what you can pay out of pocket. The third topic is loans. Obviously, that's a portion of funding for college that many parents are looking at using. Scholarships would be the fourth category, and those could be either merit or need-based scholarships. Student work, either on campus or off campus, might be a way to help pay for college. And then other contributions, such as money from grandparents or other relatives, you might be able to put those into the pot and add those to your budget. So what I've created here is the one-page college funding plan, and it takes all of those resources that we just talked about and puts them down on paper. And when you total them all up, you get that budget, that pre-approval amount that I was talking to when you compare it to searching for a house. On the left side is all of your resources, your savings, other assets, monthly cash flow. This is where you might be able to put away some from your daily expenses. There's also tax credits that you might be eligible for depending on your income level. Parent loans, I'd love you to put in a 0 here to start with and use those only if absolutely necessary. Student resources, your students might have some savings or some monthly money that they're earning from a job that they can contribute. Student loans, for student Stafford loans, the maximum that a student can borrow under their name is $27,000 for 4 years. And then private student loans, I'd again like you to consider leaving that at 0 for now and seeing if you need to fill a gap later on. And then the final category is other help. You bring those all over to the right side, you total them up. And for this particular example, you're looking at a budget of about $100,000. So that would be a school where you have to pay $25,000 per year out of pocket. Now, a lot of people ask me again, what's a reasonable borrowing value? And if you put in the major of your student at $40,000, that's about what would be a reasonable borrowing amount for that student. So you can think about potentially getting some extra private loans if you need them. But I would recommend that you don't go over that $40,000 of borrowing. All right. So now that you've thought about your own family finances, you might understand what assets that you have available to pay for college. You understand what you can pay out of pocket. Now it's time to understand the financial aid process. And you need to understand the 2 financial aid forms that are most common that parents need to fill out and how those might impact money that you might get from a school. So let's talk a little bit about what financial aid actually is. There's 2 types. The first type is merit-based, and this is going to be based on the academic performance or talents or leadership aspects of your student. And it's given typically in the way of gift aid. So that would be scholarships that you don't have to pay back. The second category of financial aid is need-based, and these types of aid are only going to be awarded to students who demonstrate financial need. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means in a few minutes. It's typically awarded in 2 different ways. There's gift aid, which is scholarships and grants. A lot of grants come from either the federal government or state governments, and self-help. And that's a generic term that can apply to student loans or work study. And this is aid that you do have to either pay back or you have to work in order to get it. All right, so let's look at, for the class of 2018, college is going to begin next year in the fall of 2018. I want to talk a little bit about timing, how all of this happens. For admissions, many schools, you'd be applying this fall, and many schools have their applications due by November 1st. So hopefully you've gone through that process. If you have a senior, if you have a junior or younger, you'll be thinking about this for next year. The FAFSA was available to start being filled out on October 1st of this year. I typically remind parents to file it by November 1st, and that's because a lot of the state aid and a lot of merit aid at specific schools is given out on a first come, first served basis. So if you don't apply by the time you submit your application, then you could potentially not be eligible or not receive that aid, even though you might have been eligible. The tax year figures that are used, and this is what's called your base year, which is the FAFSA for the first year of your child's college, is 2016 for the class of 2018 for going into school in the fall of 2018, and this is the prior year. And the asset figures that you use are as of the day you file. So those 2 are different from each other. The tax years used are 2 years prior. The asset figures used are as of the day you file. So for example, if you filed on October 1st, 2017, you would use the asset amounts that are in those accounts as of October 1st, 2017. Okay, so I mentioned the FAFSA and the CSS profile, and they're slightly different. And so I want to run through some of the criteria and the descriptions of each. The FAFSA is used by the majority of schools, and it's the only form used by the majority of schools. All but about 300 schools use just the FAFSA to determine financial aid. It is the FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It is what is called the federal formula, so it's standard across the entire country, and it is required to receive federal student aid. The website that you would submit it at is fafsa.ed.gov. Like I said, it is available on October 1st, and it has a standard set of questions. Now let's contrast that with the CSS profile. Like I mentioned, about 300 schools use the CSS profile in addition to FAFSA. It is not free. It costs, I think it's maybe $25 for the first one, and then an additional fee for people after that. But those costs can change year to year. It uses the institutional formula, so the institutional methodology, which is a different formula for each institution. They can choose how they weight the different numbers that come through on that profile. You apply for it at collegeboard.org. Again, it also opens on October 1st each year. And like I said, the questions are chosen by each institution. So not only can they calculate aid need differently, but they can choose different questions to use as well. And when you're filling out the CSS profile and you're applying to multiple different schools, you would see questions that all of the different schools have chosen all at one time. Okay, so how is need actually then calculated? Financial need. If you look at the cost of the school each year, and that's the COA, the cost of attendance, that includes tuition, room and board, fees, some travel expenses, personal expenses. They total that all up, and there's a number that's posted on every school's website as the cost of attendance. The financial aid process spits out the expected family contribution, and that's your EFC. You'll see that acronym in a lot of different places, and that's what it stands for, the expected family contribution. And this is what the schools actually expect your family to be able to contribute. Most parents are shocked when they see how high it is, and we'll talk a little bit more about how it's calculated in a few minutes, but it is the amount that schools expect you to be able to pay. So if you're not able to pay that expected family contribution, then you might need to be a little bit more creative in looking for schools that might help you cover some of that. If you subtract that from the cost of attendance, you get the financial aid need. And this is what the school will look at when they're determining how much of aid to give you, is what that financial need is. So let's look at a couple of examples. And again, it totally depends on the cost of attendance. For College 1 here, the cost is $50,000. You subtract out your EFC, which is the same. Both of these schools are FAFSA schools, and you end up with $30,000 of need. For College 2 here, you have a cost of attendance of $20,000. The EFC is $20,000. So you have zero need at that school. They're not going to offer you financial aid, and you have to pay $20,000 out of pocket. Now, not all schools cover 100% of need, and we'll talk about that a little later as well. One thing I do want to point out is when you do have multiple children in school at the same time. So for example, if you had a child going to school and then 2 years later their younger sibling would be in school, then the EFC total for your family of 20,000 would be split into two. So each student would have an EFC of 10,000. So that definitely would affect their need eligibility at each school. So in order to calculate your EFC, you can get an estimate of it on the collegeboard.org site. You can also go to the FAFSA forecaster site and use also net price calculators that are on the school websites. Okay, so just like a back of the envelope calculation, I always get people asking me, how much money do I have to make before I don't get any financial aid? And, it really depends on the cost of attendance of the school. You can see, for example, with a adjusted gross income of about 150,000 and 2 dependents in your home, your your expected family contribution is $32,000 approximately. And for most schools, that's not going to get you any financial aid. Obviously, for the more expensive private schools, you will still have some financial need. But as you can see, the EFC climbs quickly as you get to the higher income levels. And so you might not have any financial need at some of the more expensive schools if you make over $200,000 a year. All right, so let's look a little bit about into the details of the EFC formula. There's 4 different categories of numbers that the EFC looks at, and each one is calculated a little bit differently. The first category, as I mentioned earlier, there's assets and income, and the timing of when you count those are different. But the first category is parental assets. Now, there is an asset allowance that's taken out, subtracted out of your parental asset total. It is based on the age of the oldest parent. And it's not as much as you might think it would be. But what's remaining after that asset allowance is multiplied by 5.64%, and that gives you the parental contribution from assets. So, for example, if that value was $10,000, you'd be paying $564 from those assets is what the government would expect you to contribute to your child's education. The student assets, on the other hand, do not have an allowance. So every dollar of student assets that they have is counted at 20%. So if they have $10,000 in an account that's under their name, they would be paying $2,000. They would be expected to pay $2,000 from those assets as a contribution to each year. Parent income, you are given a living allowance, as well as taxes are subtracted out of that, obviously. So it's then multiplied by each dollar of income after that is multiplied by about 22% up to 47%. And it's a sliding scale. So the higher your income goes, the higher those dollars are weighted. And that becomes your parent contribution from income. And student income is just slightly different. You're given a $6,350 allowance plus taxes for student income, but it is counted much more heavily, and it's counted at 50% for each dollar each year of that student income. And so that you add all those up, the parent contribution from assets and income, the student contribution from assets and income, and you have your expected family contribution. Okay, so here's the asset protection allowance. Like I said, it's based on the age of the older parent and whether or not there are 1 or 2 parents in the household. If the oldest parent's 50 and there are 2 parents in the household, you have an asset protection allowance of $21,200. This does change every year, and it has been going down over time. So the amount of assets that are protected is not very high. All right, so a lot of questions that I get has to do with what is actually accessible as an asset on the FAFSA. Things that you might think would be are like cash, and anything you have sitting in a account, checking account, assets you have in 529 savings plans. And this would be for all of your children, not just the one that is applying for college at that time. That's because the beneficiaries can be changed. And this is also 529 savings plans that are owned by you or the student. So those would all be combined into that number. Any Coverdale education savings accounts, mutual funds, bonds, stocks, all taxable investments, rental real estate equity, vacation property equity are both included on the FAFSA, but not your primary residence equity. So another couple of other non-assessable assets would be traditional IRAs, Roth IRAs, company retirement plans, pensions, annuities, cash value life insurance, again, home equity in your primary residence, and small business assets if you have less than 100 employees. Okay, as we talked about before, the contribution from income, like I said, if your available income is over $32,000, so this is after that allowance that you're allowed, they're going to count 47% of each of those dollars. So you can see how that can add up very, very quickly. Okay, so the two we've talked about so far are the FAFSA, which is the federal methodology, and the CSS profile, which is the institutional methodology. There is a third methodology called the consensus methodology, and it is slightly different than the profile methodology. And so here are the key differences in how these schools count different assets. Um, the FAFSA, like I said, does have an asset protection allowance. The CSS profile does not, nor does the consensus methodology. So um, for most people, your expected family contribution will go up based on the CSS profile if you have significant amounts of assets. The cash mutual funds and 529s are counted approximately equally. Small businesses are not counted on the FAFSA if you have less than 100 employees, like I mentioned, but they are counted on both the CSS profile and the consensus methodology. Non-qualified annuities, like I said, are not counted on the FAFSA, but they are assessed at a 5% value on the other two methodologies. Home equity is not counted on the FAFSA, but it does vary for the CSS profile. Schools count it at 100%. Some schools use some multiple of income. It really depends on the school, and it is very difficult at times to figure out how they count home equity. One way that you can try to dig into it is to go on their net price calculator. If they ask for home equity in the net price calculator, you can kind of play around with it and see how much that impacts your EFC. That's one way that you might be able to back into how they count the home equity. Assets and student names are considered pretty heavily for both FAFSA and CSS, but not so much in the consensus. Assets and siblings names, which you might be surprised, are not counted at all in the FAFSA, but they are counted for the CSS profile and consensus. And non-custodial parent resources, so this is for parents who are divorced or separated, are not considered on the FAFSA, but they can be considered on the profile and are definitely considered in the consensus methodology. So your particular family situation is really going to drive the impacts of some of these numbers to your particular expected family contribution. And that's why it's really important to understand the schools that you're applying to, what financial aid forms do they require, and how do they count your assets and your income. All right, so now that you know what your funding philosophy is, you know your budget, you understand the financial aid process, you understand the formulas, how are you going to cut the cost of college? Because I can promise you that the EFC is going to be much higher than you think, and the amount of financial aid that you get from schools is probably going to be much lower than you think. So there really are some strategies that you can use to cut the cost of college with savings, scholarship, borrowing, and picking the right school. And that's step 3 in paying for college without going broke. So I use a 4-quadrant system to determine what kind of family you are for financial aid purposes. At the top, you've got the high merit students. At the bottom, the low merit students. And then you're either a low need family or you're a high need family. And for each family, there are specific strategies that you can use to cut the cost of college. Most of the families that I work with fall into quadrant 1, where they have high merit students, but they have low financial need. And so the keys that I'm looking for to help them out would be to find schools that will give them non-need merit aid, help them find private scholarships, help them pick the right school. And that truly is the most important strategy for paying less for college, is picking the right school. Test prep is a really important strategy for helping get more merit aid from each school. There are schools where one more point in the ACT can get you $40,000 more in merit-based over the course of your student's college career. And then tax aid. Are there any tax strategies, tax deductions or credits that we can use to be able to improve improve your financial situation and help you cut the cost of college? There's obviously other strategies that you might be able to use for other types of families. Obviously some that you can't use if you have a low merit student. But again, it really is important to think about what quadrant you fit in as a family, and what are those things that you can do to impact the cost of college for you. Okay, so I've mentioned a couple times that a lot of schools don't meet 100% of financial need. Um, Schools typically look at this in one of two ways. They either meet 100% of need, which is the Northwesterns, the Notre Dames, the Harvards, the MITs, or they really focus on giving merit-based aid. So for example, if you get into MIT and you have $20,000 of financial need, they will meet it 100%, and you are only expected to pay your estimated family contribution or your expected family contribution. If you can't pay that, you're not going to get merit scholarships from these institutions to help you attend. They don't give merit-based financial aid, but they do for a student who has a low income. These are the best places that you can get 100% of your need met, and they will guarantee that you'll be able to attend their institution provided that you can get in. On the other hand, you've got merit-based institutions where they're really using their financial aid dollars to help get the right students there that they want. So they want to attract high performers, they want to attract high merit students to be able to increase the profile of their freshman classes, and they use their aid dollars to give out merit scholarships. And a lot of this information you can find on collegedata.com. You can look at each school and determine what percent of need they meet with their financial aid and how many students get merit-based aid. Okay, a lot of families that I work with think that there's more scholarship dollars out there in the private sector than there are. For the total costs of college, scholarships paid for about 31% of those in 2014, and that totaled about $155 billion. The vast majority, 86% of those, came from the institution grants and scholarships. Now, this is why I mentioned that picking the right school for your student is the most important decision that you will make in order to cut the cost of college. The majority of scholarships are given out by the schools. Only 13% are given out in the private sector, and these are typically a much smaller dollar amount, and they are probably more competitive that you have to apply. There could be other criteria that you need to meet to be able to get these private scholarships. They might not be guaranteed for 4 years. And so, just think about that when you're thinking about scholarships and the availability of scholarships. And athletic scholarships are by far the smallest percentage, only 1% of scholarship dollars available. So when we're talking about merit aid, that's, like we said, it's gift aid, and it comes most of the time in the form of institutional scholarships. There's a couple of different ways that schools use this kind of aid to entice people. So some schools use more competitive process. You can take a test, you can compete in some kind of a contest, you can do an audition or some kind of a performance. Those are competitive merit aid scholarships. Some schools just base their merit scholarships on a grid, and the grid is typically SAT or ACT scores and GPA. And for each combination of those two, they offer a certain dollar amount. So you can sometimes find the grid on their website and be able to look into how much you might be eligible for. And then some schools use what's called preferential packaging. And this is for them to be able to put together a financial aid package for students that they particularly want to attend for whatever reason. They want that student to be a part of their freshman class. So if you think about the grid, University of Alabama is one of the schools that does this. On their website, you have the descriptions of the different scholarships that they give. They give the ACT and SAT ranges and the GPA ranges, as well as the dollar amounts that they receive. If you put this into a grid, you can see that going from a 29 to a 30 ACT score will give you almost $20,000 more in scholarship over the 4 years. If you go from a 31 to a 32, you could have over almost $36,000 more over 4 years. And these are real dollars. And spending a small amount on test prep, it typically rewards your student with increased scholarship awards that definitely make it worthwhile to do that test prep. Okay, so let's look into another calculation. We've mentioned net price. It starts with the same cost of attendance that we looked at in the financial aid calculation. You subtract out the merit or gift aid received, and you get to the net price for that school. And really, at the end of the day, net cost is all that matters. Your expected family contribution, again, is what they expect you to pay, but your net price can be either higher or lower than that, depending on the eligibility of your student for merit aid and how much the school covers of your financial needs. So let's look at a couple of examples here. This is for a high need student. You've got two different schools that you're comparing here, a state university and a private university. The cost of attendance is approximately double for the private. Your EFC is $10,000 for your family. Your need at in-state U is 15 grand. At private U, it's 42 grand. Now, like I said, state universities typically don't meet 100% of need. This one only meets 53%, and they did it with a combination of gift aid of $1,000 that doesn't need to be paid back, and then self-help, which is loan and work study to the tune of $7,000. The total aid for this school would be $8,000. Your unmet need at that school is $7,000. So your total annual net cost is $17,000 per year for in-state. For private university, your need eligibility is going to be $42,000. This school meets 100% of financial need, and they do that with a combination of a $35,000 merit scholarship or gift aid, tuition discount, whatever you want to call it. It knocks down the price significantly. They also offer that $7,000 in loans and work study, and so their total aid is $42,000. You have $0 of unmet need, and your net price is going to be $10,000 per year, which is equal to your expected family contribution. This really shows you that for a lot of students, it can be less expensive to go to a private institution than a state institution. It really depends on your particular family situation and the cost of the schools that you're looking at. All right, when we look at a low need student, so this student has $45,000 EFC, they have no need at in-state U, they've gotten that $1,000 in gift aid that they would have gotten if they were high need on the other page. They're only eligible for the loan portion of that, which is $5,500 for the self-help. So they've got total aid of $6,500. Their annual net cost for that school is $18,500. You take the private school example, their eligibility for need is $7,000. They're still going to get that same $35,000 merit scholarship that they would have gotten had they been high need. And their self-help is $5,500. So the total aid that they get is $40,500. Your out-of-pocket cost is only going to be $11,500 for that school, even though your EFC is $45,000. So for students who have low need, like I said, it really is super important that you pick the school that wants your student and that will give them a significant merit aid package to entice them to go there. That's the only way that you're going to pay less than your EFC to go to college. All right, so let's head back here to our one-page college funding plan. And now when you're looking at this 4-year pre-approval amount of $98,800, you need to start thinking about how you're going to actually use those funds to pay for school. So I recommend that parents, families sit down and break this out year by year by year. If you look at the year one costs as well as financial aid that you might receive, you need to increase the cost of school over the 4 years if the school that you're going to increases tuition for current students. Some don't, and they're claiming that they keep it level. But you need to look at this on a year by year basis, put the plan together for all 4 years or five if your student is not going to be able to graduate in 4 years. You put that cost to attend, your net cost at the top, and then you figure out how you're going to actually pay for it. Are you going to go for those private scholarships that you've got to compete for? What can you add in based on your parent cash flow? Work study, is that an option for your student? The education opportunity credit for taxes, 529 withdrawals, other assets, grandparent family help. And then when you look at the loans, what are those loans that you're going to have to take out for the difference in order to fund college? And that's really how you tell if this is an affordable school or not. For this particular family, they're going to have to take out significant parent plus or private student loans to fund the difference between what their budget is and what the cost of attendance is for each school or for this particular school. So, at the end of the day, you're looking at over $100,000 in additional loans to be able to pay for this particular school. And if you look at this on a total payment basis over 10 years at an interest rate of 6%, the monthly payment's going to be $1,500. And that's not affordable for most people. And you're going to pay back over time almost $200,000. If you spread it out over 25 years, it lowers your monthly payment, sure, but you're going to be paying back $265,000 for those student loans. And at that point, you really have to ask yourself if that's the smart financial move. Is it going to impact your ability to retire? Is it going to impact your ability to help other kids through school? A lot of parents start off borrowing for their first child and don't really realize the snowball effect that it turns into as they get other children in school. So I recommend a couple of keys for your best loan strategy. Look into the Federal Direct Stafford Student Loan Programs. Start there. If you are eligible for subsidized student loans, you won't have to pay interest until you graduate from school. The government pays it while you're in school. They have fairly low fees and low interest rates. The unsubsidized, everybody is eligible for, so you have to start paying interest immediately. If you don't, then it will add to your principal balance. So I recommend parents help their kids pay the unsubsidized interest that is accruing while they're in school. Like I mentioned earlier, it's $27,000 max over 4 years, split up into $5,500 to freshman year, all the way up to $7,500 for senior year. Now, this is a use it or lose it loan program. A lot of people think, well, I'm just going to use my savings to pay for my first year of school, and then I'll start borrowing as I need to later on. But you don't have that ability to borrow that full $27,000 for 4 years if you don't start borrowing right away. So if you are going to borrow, if you go back to this 4-year plan to pay, I highly recommend you start doing it your freshman year so you can max out that Federal Direct Stafford Loan Program. The parent loan programs are not need-based at all. They do have a very high fee for getting those loans and a high interest rate. The interest does start to accumulate immediately, but you can borrow up to the full cost of attendance. And what I find a little bit disingenuous is a lot of schools on their financial aid websites or their net price calculators, they have a button where you can say, yes, I'll take a Parent Plus loan, and then it looks like your cost out of pocket is zero. And I really feel like that's a little bit misleading for parents. These are non-transferable. They are parent loans. You are on the hook for these. And the interest does adjust every year. So this year they're 7% fixed. Next year that could change. Private student loans are also not need-based. These are from private companies and can be either borrowed by the parent or the student. If the student is the borrower, typically they require a cosigner because most students who are 17 or 18 years old don't have a credit history and don't have the ability to show that they can pay those back. I will say about both the federal direct loan program and some of the private student loan programs for parents and students, they don't take a hard look about whether or not you can actually pay the bill because student loans are not dischargeable in bankruptcy. Um, the banks feel like it's a pretty good risk to loan people money for school. So you need to really understand whether or not you can pay the payment on these loans that you borrow for school. So I want to sort of pull all this together and make sure that you understand that it's important to put together a comprehensive college funding plan. You want to start with maximizing your aid. If there's any strategies that you can use to reduce your EFC, whether that's using your assets to pay down any debt that you might have, um, understanding how you can use, any of the ways that you could potentially shift income. If you're a business owner, there may be ways that you can decrease your income in some certain years. The most important is that college selection piece of it. Understand what financial aid forms the college requires, what percent of need they meet, and whether or not they offer merit scholarships. The third being the smart college lending strategy, making sure that you're not borrowing more than you can afford to pay back, and using those federal direct student loans to their greatest potential early on. And then fourth, the tax scholarships and personal resource planning. So this is that tax credit I was talking about, potentially gifting assets from other family members, understanding what your cash flow looks like and lowering your expenses throughout school so that you can hopefully maximize your cash flow to pay out of pocket. And then, like I mentioned, that income shifting that you can potentially do to reduce your EFC. So I really hope that this has been helpful for you. If you need help, I would love to see if my services might be a fit for you. Please, email me at college@inspirationplanning.com. Check out my website at inspirationplanning.com/college. That has a lot of my college planning resources out there. And please give me a call if you have any questions.